Good morning, Bucknutters. It's Thursday, July 10th, 2025. I'm Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning 5 and Change. This podcast covers the national champions. As you see here, like I always screw that up, all the best deli in Dayton, now serving booze. Can't beat that. Great show for you today. Got the Dean, Bill Kurlick, and the Grand Poobah, Mark Porter, hopefully coming up. He's yet to check in. We think he will. Headed into the weekend, a couple commitments coming up. Not sure if they'll be Buckeyes, but we will discuss it. We'll also discuss Gooder sunglasses. Look at these. Amelia Earhart ghosted me. They're the ones I got from my wife. Come in this great packaging. Gooder sunglasses. Best thing about them, $25. Completely durable, stylish sunnies. You may lose them. And if you do, is it that big of a deal if you get a couple pairs? It's certainly not the 250 Varnays the kids were wearing in college with the white and the band in the back. And if you'd lose those, they'd have a conniption, be on the phone to their parents crying. You know those. Lightweight and comfortable at Gooder. 100% polarized, no slip, no bounce. You can wear them on a run. You can play pickleball. You can hike, go to the beach, go out and just look cool. If you need a pair of sunnies, Gooder is giving Bucknuts Morning 5 listeners free shipping. So Gooder.com, spell it like it sounds, GOODR.com/Bucknuts, and use code Bucknuts for free shipping. Pucknuts, I think, is some kind of hockey site. But I digress. Look who it is. The Dean, the Grand Poobah. They are always on point, ready to get going here. Gentlemen. 2 commitments tomorrow, Bill. We were discussing this before the show. Not sure they're going to go our way, but a decent way to start the show current events-wise. Duncanville defensive end KJ Ford and North Carolina offensive lineman JB Shabazz will be committing tomorrow. Bill, your thoughts on both as they relate to the Buckeyes?
Well, I would not crystal ball either one of them to Ohio State at this point. In fact, I rarely do a late crystal ball anyway. But if I was going to, I wouldn't make one right now. But having said that, I wouldn't necessarily count Ohio State out, particularly with KJ Ford, because there is certainly still a need at his position. You look at the 2 positions. Ohio State has one edge guy, defensive end guy in the class, Kyrie Wilder. And he's a guy that is not just a pure defensive end edge. They've talked to him about you can move inside and rush man packages and play inside as a rush guy from the inside. So they have just one defensive end edge that also could double as an interior guy at times. So they need another one there. You look at the offensive line, they've got 4 offensive line commitments. They would like another one, yeah, but they already have 2 tackles, and JB is a tackle. But they've got 2 already, and Aaron Thomas, and then, of course, Sam Greer. So that's not as big a need. So I think, if you're going to make a late offer, I think that there'd be certainly reason more to make a late offer, up your offer, however you want to put it, to KJ Ford. Most of the buzz right now for Ford is around Florida, Texas A&M a little bit, and then Ohio State. But again, I think this is a little bit more open. I don't think he's a done deal to go to Florida necessarily at this point. And it is going to be a Friday night announcement. He's announcing at 8:30 on Friday night. And he's going to do it on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch it with us with 247 Sports. So, that's something to keep an eye on. Shabazz, again, is tomorrow as well. And if I had to put a pick on him right now, I'd probably go with Tennessee. But South Carolina has kind of been the school of most mention leading up to things. I think I mentioned on Tuesday that I knew at that point for a fact that Tennessee felt they were absolutely right there in that battle. So we'll see with those 2.
Quick follow-up here. Ford, from Eric Turnbull. Ford isn't a must get, but it'll reset the board if he doesn't commit to Ohio State. Where do they go if so? Still basking, though. Thank you very little, or thank you a lot. Do you get the vibe that defensive end is still the hole?
Well, yeah, they absolutely want to add another defensive edge guy. And let's say that Ford does go elsewhere. You look at the rest of the players that have made official visits to Ohio State that have not yet announced the decision. Well, there aren't any at defensive end edge. Everybody besides Ford has made a commitment somewhere. The only one that hasn't is Jake Cruel. And as I mentioned quite a while back, I had a source tell me that Cruel is not going to end up at Ohio State. And I talked about that on our show. I talked about that in my writings. And sure enough, recently Cruel narrowed his choices down to 3 schools, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Texas. So if Ford isn't a Buckeye, then the board has to be reset. They've got to go out and find other guys that they're interested in. And that could be guys that they eventually look to flip. It could be somebody else that they offer great senior seasons, or it even could wait till the transfer portal opens in December.
Mark, Terry Slusher beat me to the punch here, so let's give him credit. Is there an Ohio defensive end in the class 2026 that you think legitimately could be that guy that has yet to get an offer from Ohio State?
I don't think there is a defensive end in Ohio that is good enough. I think some of the names that we've talked about, Elijah Durham-Smith from Pickerington North. I know Bill and I watched him work out, I believe, twice at Ohio State. He went to back-to-back camps trying to earn the offer. Lance Dawson from Avon looked great at the Ohio State camps, but he's already committed to a school, I believe Cincinnati. Malachi Irvin at Pickerington North was another one. Landon Vic Roy at Westerville South. I'm looking at some other names, but I just don't see that upper echelon pass rusher coming out of Ohio this year. It just wasn't a great defensive end year. And, some of the defensive tackles, we got Jameer Perez. We've talked about Jamarcus Weish from Trotwood. Tyrell O'Neill from Benedictine is committed, and a lot of these other guys on this list aren't the caliber we need. So the defensive line in Ohio did not give us what we needed in Ohio, but we had certainly the offensive line call and a few other positions in Ohio that were good enough.
Weiss just flipped his commitment. I think it was Toledo, and he flipped to Purdue. So we'll get to see plenty of him. I'm not positive it was Toledo. I'm pretty sure it's Purdue. Bill, this is the questions we're going to start getting now, so we got to be ready for this. Any chance of flipping a guy like Welful or someone else? Even if you go to the 24/7 Sports main site, there's a lot of which 5 stars could flip chatter as the 26 class kind of congeals across the board. Your thoughts?
Well, again, in recruiting, especially with the NIL and all that, I never say never. But with Luke Welful, I just don't. Ohio State increased their interest package and all that at one point and had him going to Ohio State. USC then increased things even more. And I just don't see Ohio State going that high for a defensive end. USC went really high for him. And I just don't see that happening. Now, again, maybe it does, but I don't think that's going to happen, to be honest. Could there be somebody else? Yeah, again, Ohio State is pretty darn good at flipping guys, but they usually do it later in the process. So we'll see what happens down the road. But Welful, I don't think that's going to happen.
Thanks to Mika, it was not Louisville. It was not Toledo. It was Louisville that Weiss flipped to. Flipped from to Purdue. Good Lord. Are we sure it's Welful, Bill? Luke Welful?
Yes, that's how he pronounces his name, Luke Welful.
That's reason not to take him right there. Waffle's way better for a name than Welful. But
we talked about the flips on the last show. It just a reminder of what the season is. The season is emotional, and it's emotional for everybody. Humans are emotional. Clemson starts off bad. If Ohio State starts off bad, God forbid,
Mark,
I know the blasphemy and the basking, but there are trip ups at the beginning of the year that come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden kids, freak out, and their parents freak out, and oh my gosh, this school isn't as red or white hot as it was a year ago, and I have to be with the most white hot team in the country because I'm that type of player. That's the type of thinking that will get guys flipped, and of course. Right around December, the big money that's left. So some teams may have some money left over and throw it at people. And that's the other time people are flipping. So I think everybody's in play. I'm the cynical one. I'm the jaded one that, has a little more doom and gloom to him than Bill and Dan. Maybe I've lived a tougher life or something. Yeah, combined. But yeah, I do touch on the darker subjects here at Bucknuts, and it's not always the funnest thing, but when you're talking flips, those are the irrational times that are coming ahead. We just don't know what they are, and we can't predict them sitting here when it will strike.
With the as Mark mentioned, if there's a coaching change, then all bets are off. And if there would happen to be a coaching change at USC, then yeah, all bets will be off there for sure. And Ohio State does do a really good job when there are changes like that of getting on guys. But think about what USC is doing. They've spent a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money, and they have the #1 class in the country. Well, things haven't gone that great, to say the least, for Lincoln Riley at USC, but he's got a huge contract. They have to do that. They've got to get things going in the right direction. And what way costs more? Buying out somebody's contract for many years that's making a ton of money, or spending some money this year on recruits and getting a great class. So, I think that's part of the reason you make that decision, that you don't want to have to change directions with Riley, because that's going to cost you a lot more. So you go and you spend money to improve the program, and that's what they're doing.
There's a question here about a couple of dudes that I had up from Mika that I was going to ask Mark. So giving you a second. I think it's defensive ends that we haven't asked about. There we go. Jeremiah Nash and Antoine Holman. I can only assume if Mika's asking if they're from Ohio.
Those
Am I wrong, Bill?
That pop up in my head. But when you guys we were talking about defensive ends, I should have went to my linebacker list to see if there are any possible Ohio linebackers that will grow into defensive end. And it's not Jacoby Clapper or Storm Miller or Santa. Aiden Reeder at St. Xavier was a guy I really liked, but Cam Thomas was a defensive end hybrid who I think committed to Illinois. Daniel Vollmer from St. Xavier is another guy. I don't know if he grows into a defensive end, but it is unusual that we do not have a defensive end in Ohio to pimp out. And, there's usually always one of those guys, but this year it just didn't seem to be that body style that, popped up for us. I thought Fogle, the tight end at Lexington, was a heck of a defensive end, but obviously he's going to tight end. So
let's hit that one. That's actually interesting. Braden Fogle. I first heard him as a hooper. Verbally committed to Georgia recently, I believe.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare, Bill, for a team with the recruiting profile of Georgia to offer and take a commitment from a guy from Ohio that Ohio State has not offered. It's usually – now, look, I'm not saying anything about Fogle here. This is not me to speak, but I can tell you this. When the Cowboys go to draft somebody from the Columbus area or the state of Ohio, if Ohio State did not offer them, I am not psyched. See Charlton Kamataco, by the way. Bill, your thoughts on Braden Fogle? Appears to have all the athletic traits you'd want in a tight end. Now, Ohio State has done a really good job recruiting tight ends nationally. I know they don't get maybe some of the same fanfare, but if you look at them rankings-wise and just how they project, they're spectacular. So, William, your thoughts on Braden Fogle and his decision to head for the Peach State?
I remember standing there watching him at camp, and Mark, you were right there too, watching him. And he was working out as a tight end, even though, as Mark said, what about defensive end, outside linebacker, edge guy? And I'm confident that that is a possibility with him too. But he has been recruited as a tight end. He worked out as a tight end at Ohio State. And to be honest, I was really impressed with him at Ohio State's camp. And if I remember right, you were too, Mark. I was a little surprised. I thought maybe he would get an offer, but Keenan Bailey had him right there and watched him close up and had him in his top group and everything else, and they didn't offer. They just liked others better at tight end. And obviously Georgia has a different feeling. Only time will tell who turns out right on that one. But I will say that I liked Braden Fogle at Ohio State's camp.
I agree. I'm not going to backtrack. I really liked him a lot. And, I think the basketball thing threw off his recruitment. I think at one point in time he told people he didn't want to play football, or maybe I'm not putting those words in his mouth, but there was an insinuation that basketball ranked higher than football. And at one point his basketball offers outdid the football offers. Just talking about some bodies in Ohio, the 3 best tight ends in Ohio could all be the 3 best defensive ends in Ohio. Fogle could be the best defensive end in Ohio. Landon Myree from Princeton is one of the better tight end looking, defensive end looking bodies to come out of Ohio. And then Preston Friesel from Toledo Central Catholic committed to Notre Dame as a tight end, and we didn't offer him. So there were 3 big time tight ends that the national tight end picture superseded, like you guys are saying. And then I know Nick Lauder from Lebanon and Cooper McCutcheon from Moeller and Sam Hamilton from Moeller. Those were 3 big time, like Big Ten type tight ends that are going to be blown up. So we had bodies, and I think if you flipped all those guys to defensive end, they could be some of the top. The body at tight end is stealing from the defensive end talent pool. Those are the same body, 6'5", 6'6", 230, 240. So we had them in tight end this year. We didn't have them in defensive end if you want to do the deep dive.
It's actually pretty funny. I'm going to leave this up here while I read the ad. Brunt work boots. These are for guys like Mark and Bill. Look at this hat. I'm the guy who wants to wear the hat that no one else has, so you get a little icebreaker conversation starter. Never been to North Reading, Mass, but I'll say I've been there. Brunt work boots. These things are durable, pretty. Look at this. Too nice for a work boot? Not at all. Developed by a gent who was on the work site along with his buddies and wanted to create the perfect shoe for them. Brunt work boots. They are super durable. You can spill anything on them. Lightweight, water resistant, slip and oil resistant, heat resistant, electrical hazard rated. I don't even know what that means. Durable work boots that are as comfortable as your sneakers. They already have 500,000 customers. This is the Marin work boot. Not only built for the toughest job sites, completely waterproof. Rain, mud, standing water. Your feet stay dry. Very important. Best boots on the planet. You have to try them to know it. Tired of the workwear brands that were out there cutting corners? You work too hard to be stuck in uncomfortable boots that don't hold up, so they built something better. Boots that are insanely comfortable and built for any job site and look tremendous. For a limited time, our listeners get $10 off at Brunt when you use code Bucknuts at checkout. Just head to bruntworkwear.com, B-R-U-N-T, workwear, one word.com, and use code Bucknuts and you're good to go. After your order, they'll ask you where you heard about Brunt. Do us a favor and tell them it was from this show. All right. Doug Shepard. I read once a good while back that Ohio State wouldn't offer kids that wouldn't consider Ohio State. Bill, your thoughts on that? That doesn't seem to be a prevalent type of player right now. I imagine anyone they can get to at this point in time would consider it. But how much research do you think they're doing on whether the guy will give them a yes beforehand?
Well, they know if there's even a shot. And you bring up the main point. There are very, very few guys out there that if Ohio State comes calling, they're not at least going to take a look. I mean, it's the Ohio State for a reason, so they don't have to worry about that very often at all. And that might be in reference perhaps a little bit to Fogle and playing basketball and all. And I will say that when I talked to Fogle at camp that day, and he didn't mention Ohio State prominently, but Ohio State hadn't offered him at that point. I think had Ohio State offered Fogle a scholarship, they would have got his attention.
I think that statement's really true for Ohio guys. But I think out-of-state guys, I noticed that sometimes, you kind of have to play the game with the kids from Florida or Texas, and you kind of have to early offer them just to get them to come to your camp. And sometimes they're not even committable offers. So I think those kids, it's hard to know if they truly grew up with an Ohio State bone in their body watching Big Ten football every weekend. But in Ohio, before they pull a trigger, they're pretty well informed on the love for Ohio State, whether it's the dad and mom who grew up Buckeye fans or the family who was a household weekly watcher of Buckeye games. And that's what makes it so much easier to recruit in Ohio, because you have the heart already in the building.
Speaking of the heart being in the building, how about when it's outside the building? Grandpa Buck. Doesn't seem recruits are being deterred from going to that team up north. I think that's Michigan. Do you guys talk to recruits about concerns of penalties looming? I doubt you guys do that, given the fact you're not recruiting technically for Ohio State. However, I would like to get a sense from you on the trail. Do you think there's overriding fear, Bill, among recruits to go to Michigan? Do they feel the hammer is coming? Mark, among coaches, among guys who recruit against Michigan, et cetera, guys at Michigan, do you feel that way? So, Bill, you can have the floor first, but this is a question that, shocker, people on this site will be interested in.
I really don't hear a lot about that. And now, again, like you said, Dan, I'm not covering Michigan recruiting. And to be honest, Michigan and Ohio State don't necessarily butt heads on the recruiting trail as much as, say, 15 years ago or whatever, 20 years ago. Michigan hasn't recruited Ohio that hard recently. And I know Mark has talked about that. So, again, I don't talk as anywhere near as much to kids that Michigan is recruiting as I do Ohio State. But having said that, I still don't hear a lot about that. And I'm going to go back to that one question somebody said, is there any defensive linemen that, as they put it, when Michigan, I think, gosh, can you call that up again, Dan? I forget exactly how it was put. Does Michigan have any worthwhile defensive linemen that will jump ship when the postseason bowl ban drops in a few weeks? Well, this stuff with Michigan and penalties, I think it's been going on longer than I've been covering recruiting. It seems like so at some point it's been going on forever, and nothing has happened. I will believe it when I actually see it, that the hammer gets dropped and all that. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm just saying that it's been going on forever and it hasn't happened. So we'll see what happens. But in answer to that question, yeah, there's a guy that Ohio State would like to jump on in a heartbeat. Carter Meadows, the defensive end from Gonzaga, Washington, D.C. I think in the end he picked Michigan over Ohio State. That'd be a guy Ohio State would absolutely be of a welcoming nature to come into the Ohio State program if Michigan did get the, quote, hammer dropped on them and he wanted to flip.
Carter Meadows, an impressive athlete, also has Division I basketball offers and got minutes on Gonzaga's basketball team last year. And if you know, Gonzaga plays in arguably the toughest conference in the United States. So, Mark, your thoughts on the Michigan recruiting vibes?
I think Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State are too big to fail. And I think we remember Tattoo Gate or with Tressel here and penalties, and it might trip you up for a little bit. But at the end of the day, these institutions are pillars in college football. And even slaps on the wrist and bowl bans, yeah, they're a chink in the armor. And I'm sure there are players that say, well, if I have other equal offers, I will choose the other places. But at some point, Ohio State, even if they were experiencing a bowl ban this year for whatever reason, they would still be able to recruit. and they still would get top flight players. It might be a little harder, it might be a little agitating, but I've been to Michigan recently, and I've seen what it looks like, and they won that national championship, and I think I told you guys, you couldn't walk 3 feet without a TV screen or a banner or a reminder or some sort of countdown clock, or not to mention their success against Ohio State. They're living off of that success right now and that glory. So as much as there is negativity and a looming and doom coming, I don't think it's really killed their recruiting. I think it's made it harder, but they're still Michigan. We're still Ohio State. And I hate to give them any props on Ohio State. The Michigan people are probably clipping this right now saying, wow, there's an Ohio State guy, who's speaking positively of us right now. And it's not positive. It's just the facts that there's millions and millions and millions of dollars behind these institutions. And even when they do get slapped, they'll live to fight again. The day they will rise again. And you know what? Ohio State needs them to rise again. It wasn't fun beating them 20 years in a row. It made it almost irrelevant. Again, I'm saying crazy stuff, but it's more fun when you're not beating up your little brother every year, and he's an actual fighter, and you can after the fight say, "Wow, we accomplished something." For a while there, it was beating up on the little sisters of the poor, but times have changed.
I'm not going to say any names, but there was a time when Michigan was recruiting so poorly that it wasn't even, I'm not saying fun, but it was beating up on a weakling. So there you have it. All right, let's kill some of these questions off here. One came from Mika, of course. Bill, and the idea of flipping others. Parker Krim could be an option too if we could flip him from Illinois. Your thoughts? And then Mark, you would follow up on that if you know who that is.
Yeah, he's from Elely, north west Ohio, kind of Bowling Green area, and that in that MAC conference area, Coldwater. I'm not doing the best, giving you the general idea, but he worked out at the big camp they had for all the MAC schools, and he was one of the top 2 or 3 players, as he should be coming out of that conference. I think that he's a good-looking prospect, but he would have done much better coming out of Toledo Central Catholic. I think he's not as developed, maybe, or the sharpened edge isn't as sharp on him, but it will be. But that's a good name to throw out there. But he's just not ready for Ohio State football yet. Down the road, we may see him, starting for Illinois and say, "Wow, there's a heck of a player." But based on what he's done today, yeah, I knew that was coming, Steve.
Steve does not agree with Mark.
Yep.
In terms of the dominance over Michigan.
I really invited that comment because I know it was fun, but I think we know what we're talking about. It's much more fun now.
There you go. You're welcome, Grandpa Buck, for sure. Another one in your wheelhouse, Marcus. I heard Ohio State has some interest in Don Black Jr., offensive tackle, defensive tackle from Tri-Village. Is there any smoke there? Now, Tri-Village is not a big place, but I can tell you this. They got tough kids, and their basketball team is something to watch. So I don't know if that has anything to do with football, but Mark, your thoughts.
I do not have Don Beam in my system yet. I have to get to
That's awesome. Well, that's good for you.
So that's good. That's a name that I will be looking at, and it's that time of the year where I think someone asked the question on the last podcast, where are Bill and Mark going week 1? And I was like, oh, please, Dan, don't ask us that.
Yeah.
That's all still in the planning stage of I went straight to Joe Itel's website. He doesn't even have the 2025 schedule out yet. So I don't even know if there's an official week 1, template to look at. But that's Tri-Village. Those are the places that Mark Porter loves to go because no one else is there. And it's, not like going to St. Ed's or Glenville when you're going to see 20 other beat writers. I like to go off the beaten trail.
I'm pretty sure Tri-Village is also one of those places where if you go to a game on Friday night, you could also rob a bank in town and get away very easily. No one, it's fantastic.
You guys won't know if I rob the bank, but there will be signs.
There will be. Your wife will be much nicer to you.
By the way, anybody that doesn't know, Tri-Village is in New Madison, Ohio.
I did not know that.
And Black is about a 6'4", maybe about a 6'4", 280, 275, 280-pound tackle. Have not heard Ohio State connected with him, really.
All I know is they had a kid who played basketball and transferred to Valley View and affected the Jacks. So that's how I know about it. Coach Nene asked a great question, and on the Parker Krim vibe, I think this kind of handles it. And also, I don't think that Max Clare's approach to football was this specifically, but is working out that way. Coach Nene asked, do you think some high school players will take the biggest payday for the first 2 years, then hit the transfer portal and worry about their draft stock in year 3 and 4? I don't know if that was an intentional maneuver, but if you look at the guys Ohio State adds that have come, Philip Daniels, for example, from Minnesota, I'm not sure what his payday was at Minnesota, but guys who can go off and get a higher payday and kind of intern at another big-time school and still make it back to Ohio State, that would make sense to me. You guys have thoughts on this? Bill, you can take that first.
Yeah, with Daniels, I know that Minnesota did not want to lose him, and they were a little surprised. They did not. He ended up playing some early, but that was purely because, in big part, because in Minnesota had some injuries, and they really had to have him step up, and he played early. They had projected him to play more down the road. They felt like he was going to be a good player for them, but it would be down the road, and they were a little bit surprised that Ohio State went after and took him away from their program. Ohio State sees the potential in him down the road to really develop into a very good offensive lineman for them. It wasn't necessarily a situation that coming out of high school that he thought, well, he could go to Minnesota and then 2 years later cash in, as an example. But that may happen. I think he's going to develop and become a good player at Ohio State. I think if it does happen, it happened a little bit early. They didn't expect that to happen, that he would end up at Ohio State as soon as he did.
Mark, do you think guys are getting advice now from people that this trend is starting up?
If there's a way to game the system, people will find it. And that sounds like a way to game the system. Take the big money, as much as you can get. Go for the first couple of years where you may not be a star anyways, and do your development somewhere else, and then see who needs a big time player in a couple of years and recash in. It's funny, I looked at that comment from Nate Beam, how he brought some attention to the kid. That's probably a good way to get a player on the map, is to ask us about him on this podcast, because we definitely will do our research. The thing that I thought of when you brought the situation up, kind of kid, take money and then go in a couple of years. Talking to college coaches this summer, there was a lot of momentum for a system that if you take a player, you're going to have to compensate the school you took them from. And we don't have draft picks, but it might be a financial thing where if you take Kent State's player or Toledo's player and they go up a level, that school will get some type of compensation back from you. And that was talked about, and a lot of people liked it, and they think it would maybe cool the Jets on some of this stuff, or at least give some revenue to the teams that are simply a farm system right now. So there may be ways to tone this down in the future, and the multi-year contract thing. We saw that with the defensive lineman. We can't get you a 1-year deal you like, but how about if we do a 2-year deal? How about if we do a 3-year deal? So I think if you can start locking kids up in multi-year deals, almost like their scholarship did, but this is going to be still not the fluid or situation that colleges want. Even though they're starting to put some rules around it, I still don't think there's enough yet.
I'll tell you this, when we start to think about it, my brain starts to hurt, because there are so many avenues and complications and pitfalls and stuff we don't know that it's going to be an adventure. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it's going to be handled in courtrooms and I use that in air quotes, like people being sued and class action suits and such. It's not going to be on the field, which clearly everyone starts here with the interest in on-field usage. All right, last question, Bill. there's all these talks about flips. And Michael Hester says, if you're going to invest in a flip, go after the number one at Maryland. I believe he's referring to Zion Elely, the defensive end. Does Ohio State have any chance? And I will say this, and this is no offense to Jeff Ehrman over at the Maryland site, who was a great friend of mine. Maryland is not Ohio State. Just ask the late, great Dwayne Haskins. It just does not enjoy the same football profile. Now, the money can level the playing field, as it were. But, Bill, this guy would require probably a pretty penny, but I think he could be flipped. That's just me on the face of it. Your thoughts?
Well, a couple things. He's really done a great job of resisting all that. He's been the attention of people regarding a flip almost ever since he committed to Maryland, which was in December, actually early December 7th of 2024, he committed to Maryland. And he's had a whole lot of attention. He's resisted that. He's stayed with Maryland. And I guess, kudos to him. He's a Maryland kid. So we'll see. I know Auburn had been involved in all the flip stuff with him, but it just hasn't happened yet. And maybe he's one of those kids that he resists it all, stays with his hometown team, and signs with and goes to Maryland.
Yeah, I get what Sean Duffy's saying here. I just don't agree. When Maryland is beating us on defensive end recruiting, we have a major problem. Maryland has all their eggs in the Zion Elely basket, and that's not where Ohio State will ever be, and I don't think you really want to be there. That's just my idea. I hear you, but can't imagine Maryland having a bag. Well, Maryland basically is Kevin Plank's team. He runs Under Armour, and I can tell you this personally. I met him in a parking lot at a Dead show in 1992, and he was selling wristbands that he bought in some foreign country and was then sneaking them into concerts. He was the guy who snuck T-shirts into Dead shows and sold them in the parking lot till the cops figured it out. He also then asked my wife if she wanted to invest $10,000 in a company he was starting, and she said no. It was Under Armour. Anyway, that's why I'm still here talking to you guys and not sitting with Lee at some deli. But we digress. All right, good show. Bill, again, there's 2 commitments tomorrow. We don't expect them to come to Ohio State, but they might. And Bill will be covering everything with bells on. The Grand Poobah is doing his work on the trail as well. We appreciate everybody stopping by. Have a good